There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly, usually somewhere in the middle of a Tuesday, when you realize how much time you've spent learning the wrong things. Not wrong in some dramatic, catastrophic way, just misaligned. Like you spent decades mastering the rules of a game you never actually wanted to play. And the ache of that realization isn't anger. It's something quieter, something closer to grief. Maybe you're feeling that right now. Maybe that's why you're here. Because somewhere along the way, you heard a voice, Jim Rohn's voice, and something in it stopped you cold. Not because he was loud, not because he promised you a shortcut, but because he said something simple, something almost embarrassingly plain, and your whole body recognized it as true before your mind had a chance to argue. That's what wisdom does. It doesn't announce itself. It just lands. The frustrating truth is that wisdom was always available to you. You just weren't ready to let it land. Think about that for a moment. Every book that could have changed your life existed before you were born. Every principle Rohn ever taught, every truth the Stoics ever recorded, every insight the great thinkers of every civilization ever pressed into words. It was all there, waiting. The library was always open. So why didn't it reach you sooner? Here's what most people miss. Understanding isn't a function of intelligence. It's a function of readiness. And readiness is built by experience, specifically by the right kind of suffering, the kind that cracks something open in you rather than closing you down. You couldn't have heard Jim Rohn at 20 the way you can hear him now, not because you weren't smart enough, but because you hadn't yet lived enough of the wrong answers to appreciate what a right question even sounds like. This is one of the cruelest and most beautiful things about growing as a human being. The very lessons you needed most in your youth were the ones you were least equipped to receive. Life had to season you first. Failure had to humble you. Loss had to teach you what mattered. And only then, only after enough of that, does the voice of a truly wise person stop sounding like advice and start sounding like a mirror. So don't waste energy mourning the years it took. Those years weren't lost. They were the tuition. Jim Rohn said it plainly, almost too plainly, which is probably why most people nodded and moved on without understanding what had just hit them. He said, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." Read that again. Not because it's complicated, because it's devastating. Look around you. Look at the 5 people who have had the most access to your time, your attention, your energy, the conversations you've had over the last year, the voices you let into your head most often. And ask yourself honestly, are those people pulling you up toward something, or are they quietly, gently, almost imperceptibly keeping you exactly where you are? This isn't about abandoning people you love. Rohn wasn't teaching cruelty. He was teaching awareness. Because here's the thing. The influence other people have on you isn't something you choose consciously. It seeps in. It shapes your vocabulary. It calibrates what feels possible. It defines in subtle and profound ways the ceiling of your ambition. And this is where it gets interesting, because the same principle works in reverse. When you deliberately choose to spend time with people who are further along than you, people who think differently, who've built what you're trying to build, who've already wrestled with and won the battles you're currently losing, something shifts. Your internal compass recalibrates. What felt impossible starts to feel merely difficult. What felt difficult starts to feel like Tuesday. This is not motivational rhetoric. This is neuroscience wearing a philosophical coat. Mirror neurons, social contagion, environmental priming. The research confirms what Rohn knew intuitively decades ago. The fastest way to change your life is to change the conversation you're surrounded by. Who are you surrounded by? And what is that doing to you? Here's something Rohn understood that most success teachers skip entirely. You cannot cannot force a harvest. You can plant in the wrong season, but the ground won't care about your urgency. You can water constantly, but the seed has its own timeline. And you can do everything right and still face a late frost that wipes out what you worked for. Most people respond to this reality with one of two failure modes. Either they rush, they plant, they panic, they dig up the seed to check if it's growing, and in doing so, they destroy the very thing they're trying to build. Or they wait without planting at all. They tell themselves they're being patient when really they're being passive, hiding their inaction behind the language of trust. Rohn's answer to this lived somewhere in between, and it required a kind of emotional discipline that nobody talks about enough. He called it working on yourself, not working on your circumstances, not grinding harder at the external game, working on the internal one. Because here is what Rohn understood about time and readiness. The person you are right now can only attract what you are currently capable of recognizing and holding. If you receive more before you've become more, you won't keep it. You've seen this play out. You've probably lived it. The money that came before the wisdom to steward it. The relationship that arrived before the self-awareness to honor it. The opportunity that showed up before you had the character to follow through. You weren't unlucky. You weren't undeserving. You were just unready. And that is a problem only one thing solves. Not time, not luck, not connections. Becoming. And this is where it gets interesting. And maybe a little uncomfortable. Rohn drew a distinction that changed how I understand the entire project of a human life. He separated formal education from self-education. And the difference isn't just academic. Formal education, he said, will make you a living. Self-education will make you a fortune. Now, before you hear that as a financial statement, hear it as a philosophical one. Because the fortune Rohn was pointing at wasn't primarily about money. It was about the compound interest of a life deliberately examined and improved. It was about the person you become when you take personal responsibility for your own growth, rather than outsourcing it to institutions, employers, or luck. Here's the uncomfortable part. Most people stop learning the moment they stop being required to. Think about the last time you read a book, not for entertainment, not to pass time, but to genuinely expand your understanding of something that mattered to you. Think about the last time you sat with a difficult idea long enough to actually change your mind about something. Think about the last time you sought out a perspective that challenged your own, not to defeat it, but to genuinely test whether your own held up. If you're drawing a blank, you're not alone. The gravitational pull of comfort is immense. The algorithm is designed to feed you what you already believe. The social environment most people inhabit rewards certainty and punishes doubt. And so most people, by their 30s, have quietly closed the file on their own development and started living on whatever they accumulated in the first act. And the years pass, and something in them knows. Something in them has always known. That is the specific pain that brought you here, not failure. Recognition, discipline, the way most people think about it, is actually a form of violence against yourself. Wait, before you dismiss that, stay with it. The discipline Rohn preached was not the gritted teeth, white-knuckle, willpower as war version that fills motivational content. That version burns out. It creates resentment. It treats the self as an enemy to be conquered, a beast to be tamed, a child to be punished into compliance. Rohn's discipline was something closer to craft. The discipline of a gardener who shows up every morning, not because they're forcing themselves, but because they genuinely understand that consistency is the only language the garden speaks. The discipline of a musician who practices scales not as punishment, but as devotion, as respect for the instrument. What would change in your daily life if you stopped thinking about discipline as something you do to yourself and started thinking about it as something you do for yourself? Not out of guilt, not out of fear, not because you're behind and need to catch up, but because the person you're becoming, the one who reads, who reflects, who chooses associations deliberately, who plants in season and tends consistently, is someone you actually want to be. That person doesn't hustle. They build. And there is a profound difference between those two words that most people spend decades confusing. So what do you do with all of this? You do the thing that Rohn spent his entire life describing in 100 different ways, from 100 different stages, to millions of people who heard it and nodded and went home and did nothing with it. You start. Not tomorrow, not when the circumstances are better. The motivation returns. The season feels right. You start with the smallest, most honest version of what you now understand. You pick up one book. You end one conversation that's been pulling you down. You spend 1 hour this week with someone who makes you feel like becoming more is possible. You plant one seed. Because here's the truth that sits underneath everything Jim Rohn ever taught. The quiet revolution that his entire body of work was pointing toward. The years you're mourning are not the point. The years ahead of you are. And you're not starting from zero. You're starting from experience, from the particular wisdom that only comes from having lived the wrong answers long enough to finally be ready for the right questions. That's not a disadvantage. That's the most valuable thing you own. It took 47 years to see it. Maybe it took you just as long. And maybe, if you're paying attention right now, in this exact moment, that's exactly how long it was supposed to take. The harvest doesn't care about the calendar. It only cares whether you've become the kind of person who's learned how to tend it. You have. You're still becoming. And that is not nothing. That is everything.